Well, it's so good to see you, Lindy. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Richard. I'm so excited for your Korean journey. Was I allowed to say that? Is that a secret? It's not a secret yet.
It's not a secret. No. So yeah, I mean, I wrote this blog post a couple of weeks ago, and my idea is that I'll update every 2 weeks. I felt every week was a little bit much to update on my journey because it would take
Yeah.
away from the actual study, and I'd be writing more about what I was going to do or meant to do than actually what I was doing. So
Yeah.
so yeah, the next update's coming up on this coming week, and it's kind of a preamble, I guess, of what's to come. So my idea
Mhm.
is this month of December, I've started looking at Korean and looking at resources that I can use because there's just so much out there. I mean, I've never studied Korean before, but at home, as every good sort of language enthusiast, I do have some Korean books. So my good friend Judith Meyer gave me a copy of her script hacking, and she wrote a very nice message in here because she's such a sweetie. Oh, she's so sweet.
Oh,
She wrote
lovely.
um, that I'm an inspiration to her, which is very, very sweet. I thought it was very cute. So she's lovely. She's actually an inspiration for me. So
Excellent. Yeah, she's great.
I have my Teach Yourself book, which
Mm,
also follows on, I guess, from the script hacking. And I've
yeah.
not touched it yet. Well, touching it, yes, but not touched it as in. And also I have Assimile Le Coréen. I also have a newer
Okay.
version of this on.
You have a new version of it?
I have a new version as well on my iPad. So
Okay.
I've got the iPad version that's sort of all electronic. So I'm going to try that as well, just as additional things to do. But I'm doing this also with my daughter. So I've got to make sure I use materials that I can use with her and she won't get bored because she's 13. So
Yeah.
it's a big ask. But you are one of my inspirations, obviously, because you've done such great things with your languages, and you're also such a lovely person, and which is why we want you speaking at every single language event ever now from for as long as we possibly can. So obviously, we interacted a little bit on social media, and you sort of wrote some nice things for me. But I wanted to just dig into your mind and see what do you think are the best, ultimate best resources I could look at for Korean and should just not
Mhm.
miss out on as I'm
Yeah.
deciding on what we're going to do.
Yes. Something I really enjoy to do when I'm learning a language is to find resources that are made in that language, well, made in the country. So I actually didn't even know Asimil had a Korean course. That was quite surprising to me. I wonder what the content would be like because often I find that these big brands that make language books tend to follow a very similar template for each. And you would know as well as any good language learner, any seasoned language learner, that every language should be approached in a different way, even if it's just the content related to the culture or anything. So I really enjoy content from Talk to Me in Korean. Have you heard of them? Pretty sure.
Is that the TT something?
Correct.
Something? I remember the TT
TTMIK.
bit, yeah. Okay, because I
Yeah.
think somebody did send me a link on Twitter or something to that, and I
Mhm.
and I clicked on it and saw the YouTube channel. It could have been you actually that mentioned it. Um,
Probably. Yeah, so they've been around for many years and they started making textbooks. So previously they just had audio and PDF courses, and they also have a wonderful YouTube channel with bite-sized stuff, but their website has lesson or rather levels. I think it goes up to maybe 6 or 7 or 9. Um, and it's really good because it's almost like a structured curriculum online, but you can buy their books as well. I've never personally used their books, but as a resource for online lessons, I really enjoy them.
right.
And of course, because Korean pronunciation can be tricky, differentiating between diphthongs and letters, anything with good audio is excellent. So I also like to use Korean Pod 101 because of audio. And then there's another app called Audio Clip. And
Okay.
Audio Clip is a Korean app, but I think they have an interface with English, which you can navigate and navigate yourself to their Korean lessons section. So there are podcasts for learning Korean made by Korean companies.
Mhm.
And anything with audio is super helpful from the start. It took me about 2 years to properly differentiate between O and A, the O and the A sounds. because when it's romanized, it's kind of just like an O or an EO. But only when you really know how to position your mouth and listen to it enough do you get the hang of the tricky pronunciation.
Oh wow! So at the end of my at the end of my first year, I should be able to differentiate at least one of them. Is that what you're saying?
I think you'll be able to get that much sooner than I did, for sure. Your pronunciation is excellent. And I'm not worried about you getting a grasp on the grammar because you do have knowledge of Japanese sentence structure. And if you just take Japanese, if you take Korean, the example sentence, and you just think in Japanese for a minute, you will grasp it just like that. They have the same object markers, subject markers, all of those particles, the sentence structure. It is the same between Korean and Japanese. It will be so easy for you.
I really appreciate your enthusiasm and optimism for my Korean. I wish my Japanese were that good. I've done a semester. I did a semester at University of Japanese. I actually did it because I was studying Chinese, strangely, and
Okay.
I was just intrigued as to how the hands the kanji worked and how that crossover was. Because I heard people talking about it, but until you actually study the different alphabets and then the kanji is a separate thing,
Mm,
it's a bit weird to think about how that works. But
yeah.
that's what that semester really was geared up for me to do that. And then later, obviously, we had the Fukuoka conference, so I sort of learned to say a few things like a very
Yeah.
good little parrot. When I went to
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, hopefully it will give me an idea because obviously I recognize certain things within the
Mhm.
sentence. And I'm hoping also my Turkish will help with that as well because Turkish sentence structure is also a little bit
That's true.
different. And that is a language that I can actually speak. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I really, really hope that will stand me in good stead. At the same time, it is brand new. I mean, it's completely new. Um, I'm looking forward to it. A little bit nervous.
Don't be nervous. No. And I don't mean to self promote or anything, but I do have a really big list of Korean resources on my website. So I can or just send you the link after because there's just too much to mention here. But if you're looking for any like extra websites or resources or textbook recommendations, it's all on my page
Oh,
there.
self-promote away because I mean the point of asking you is because you've been through this and you've done really well with it. So, it's always good, I think, when you're in this kind of journey where you start a language and you're preparing. And I've been sort of
Yeah.
hinting at this on social media that what do you do when you prepare to learn a language? And some people say, oh, nothing. And some people say, oh, yeah, I take loads of time and I procrastinate and then go nowhere. And there is definitely a danger of going down this track and going so far down it, you end up down a rabbit hole that you never come
Yeah.
out the other side. And and I say it's important to know what you want to use and why you want to use it for the simple reason because you've got to be interested in what the materials are. And if you're not interested in the materials and you don't find things that resonate with you, then
Yes.
how do you expect to continue with a boring book that you hate studying day in, day out? So
Absolutely.
for some people, some of the books that I've shown may be interesting. For others, they may not be. Some of the resources we're talking about now maybe may not be for other people again. And so, depending on your personality type, depending on what genuinely interests you, you will choose different things. So I'll put a link to your page if you send it to me. Then I'll put a link to it so other people can look at that fabulous work that you've already done in putting that list together. I'm sure lots of people will find that interesting,
Thank
including
you.
myself. Um,
Thanks. Yeah, I think, like you said, it depends on your interests. And there are amazing resources for people who are interested in K-pop. I think the Korean language industry is really riding on that wave to produce, like, learn Korean with BTS. But if you're not interested in that, that's really not going to work for you. Personally, I absolutely love diving into grammar and learning grammar structures kind of as a like design or tech brain. I like to break pieces up into systems and pieces, and Korean grammar is very beautifully systematic. Well, I guess all grammar actually. So I really enjoy books that are grammar focused, like Korean Grammar in Use. And if you get a beginner level book, you will still be able to learn useful things, but it'll be in a nice structured way if that's what you enjoy. If you have a background in Hanja or Hanzi or Kanji, focusing a little bit on basic Hanja can be very useful. So, for example, hak is the Hanja to do with school, and there are already basic vocabulary words you can learn, like hakgyo school or hakgyo semester or hakseng student. So, learning a little bit of basic Hanja, even if you don't learn the character, but just the meaning of that uh, what do you call it, set of
Yeah.
characters, that can help broaden your vocabulary a lot.
Oh wow. So hakyo is like gakkyo.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Ah. So do you get these
Yeah.
kinds of consonant shifts as well? So from an H to from a G in Japanese to an H, is that something that you would see often in Korean?
Yes, yes. You mean if you're kind of like translating the Japanese equivalent to the
Yeah.
Korean one? Yes, yes. But you can learn that easily just by getting a basic book about Hanja, and you can see the where
Oh,
it stems from. Yeah, you pick up on patterns the longer you learn.
oh yeah, that's quite useful.
Yeah.
You see that a lot, obviously, in the European languages. The Indo-European languages have a lot of that happening.
Oh yeah.
Sounds and whether it's so just typical things you can almost predict as to what they're going to
Yes.
change into.
Precisely.
So yeah, it's nice to hear that there are some of the work that I've done in Japanese with my Japanese for that
It
semester.
will pay off. It will be familiar.
Will I also go through that horrible phase of mixing them up? Because I remember when I started doing the Japanese semester, and I think you wrote about this on Twitter recently. You see, you see these characters,
Oh
and
yes.
then all of a sudden you had it the other way around, where you start pronouncing it in in Japanese, whereas I had it in
Yeah.
Japanese class, where I would just go, and then I'd say, yeah, say something really odd
Oh yeah, that
Chinese.
happens. I think it happens when you have knowledge gaps. So I might know the Chinese word for this and not know the Japanese. So when I'm reading Japanese, the Chinese pops up. That just happens because you're trying to patch up these knowledge gaps you have and make connections. But that shouldn't last for too long if you fully immerse yourself in Korean. But I don't know. The brain is a funny thing. Vietnamese and Indonesian really don't have a lot in common, but somehow I mix up the vocabulary for them. But I think it's because both of those are very beginner languages for me.
Yeah.
So if your Japanese is like intermediate, learning Korean shouldn't be a problem. If you're both learning them at the same time, maybe you will mix a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely won't be doing any active Japanese study. My Japanese
That'll help.
is definitely not intermediate. I would say it's like a beginner's level.
Mm,
It's really basic. So possibly A1.
okay.
I might be being very generous there, actually. Maybe
I
A0.
think no, no, your Japanese is great. Yeah, but I think it's definitely going to help. It will do more good than harm, I believe.
Okay, no, that's good to know. And you know, this you sort of have you ever heard of this guy Billy Go or Go Billy?
Oh, he's great. I actually have his book in my bookshelf back there. Yes.
Yeah.
He's so enthusiastic.
Because he is one of the just the initial thing that I put on sort of to check for resources. He popped up and I watched a couple of the actually they're the videos I've been watching for the writing as well, because I
Okay.
find that that's quite useful to do in tandem with the script hacking, to sort of hear the sound and
Yeah.
then also practice the things that Judith's quite kindly put together in here. I find that quite useful to start learning the alphabet. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and also I think teenager friendly is what I got from him.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Billy Go is great. His videos are good. His textbooks, if I have to be absolutely honest, from a design or layout perspective, sometimes it's a little confusing to follow the order or the layout of the pages, but the content is very relevant and interesting. But I think his videos are definitely excellent, good bite-sized and informative lessons for sure.
Yeah, and there are a lot of them as well. I mean,
Oh yeah,
you quite
there's a
literally
treasure
go
trove.
through. It feels like you can almost go through the entire year. I could just watch Billy for
Yeah.
the entire year. I mean, I'm a big fan of using different materials.
Oh, for sure.
I think it's good to have a core thing that you do because you
Mhm.
feel the progress, right? Because you can watch yourself progress from one lesson to the next. But I think it is also good to sort of dip into other things to sort of just to I think satisfy that curiosity of what's this, what's that.
Yeah.
Sometimes you find a better explanation in one book than in another. And I think sometimes this is just generally for me with languages, not Korean, obviously. I haven't got to that stage yet. But with I find it useful to sort of write out, even sometimes see words that I know I don't need to memorize right now because they're not in my book or they're not relevant to my level. But it's good to do just to practice, especially with a new alphabet, right?
Definitely. I remember at the start when I was just learning Korean, definitely helped so much to be able to read and write because it helps you pronounce more naturally. Like I mentioned at the start of this recording, the romanization can be so complex because an OE in Afrikaans is pronounced U. And in Korean, you would romanize an U sound as a U. So my mother and I were actually taking Korean lessons at the same time. And if I compared her romanization versus my romanization, I could barely read what she was writing because she was thinking with an Afrikaans brain. So everybody interprets romanized Korean in a different way. But if you learn the script and you know how to read it, you're not going to have problems with pronunciation. And I was going to say about the point of like writing down words that you see, even if you don't need to know them, that helps so much because you're exercising those muscles to try and remember these characters. I remember I would go to the Korean supermarket and I would buy packaging and I would cut out these pieces and stick it in my book and copy what the word is and try to work it out for me. It's like a puzzle piece when you really don't know a script and you're comparing, oh, is this the P or the B character? And you kind of make it fun for yourself. So maybe since you're doing this with your daughter, you can find a Korean supermarket if you have one, or print some stuff out online, cut it out, trace the letters, and make it like a fun, tangible experience.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of thing I think it's really good to do. I think even as an adult, let alone my daughter, just for me,
Yeah,
I quite enjoy doing things like that, and
yeah.
also it gives you this weird. I don't know if you get this as well. This sort of you go back to the Rosetta Stone and trying to figure out a code and decode something, sort of almost like an adventure. It's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's that child in you, right? That you just I don't know, you just feel that you're discovering new things, and it's quite exciting. But I mean, I love that you mentioned that you learned this at first with your mum as well. I had no idea that you did it with your mum in the beginning.
Yeah, she was really the reason I started. Many people think, with good reason, that I might have started because of K-pop or K-dramas. I didn't even know that existed when I started. So my mom saw an ad in the newspaper for free Korean lessons, and I had a few Korean friends at that time, 10 years ago, and she said, "Do you want to try? This is something fun we can do." I was like, "Okay, whatever, sure." And I was not a motivated student. I mean, I did my homework, but I didn't study. I didn't immerse myself. She was out there watching K dramas, making flashcards, and somehow our kind of roles just shifted and she fell away and I got really into it. But I started because of my mom.
I love that. That is so
Yeah,
nice. That is
yeah.
really, really nice. I love it. Good on your mum.
Sorry.
Good on your mum. That's fantastic.
Oh yeah, she's so sweet. I'm actually dating a Filipino guy right now, and my mom is like picking up on a few Filipino words to use with me. And back when I was interested in Hungarian, she learned some Hungarian. She's got this curiosity in her, and we have such a connection through languages as well.
Ah, okay. I love it. I love it. Okay, now I understand your Tagalog thing better.
Oh yes, it has been revealed. It's because of a boy.
I love it. I love it. How very Luca Lampariello of you.
Yeah, oh, yeah, I know. But for the record, he's teaching himself Afrikaans, so I think we're equal.
Okay, there we go. That's good. It's always good when you sort of you both learn each other's languages. I think it's really
Yeah.
important. I mean, yeah, I learned Macedonian because of my wife, so
Oh, lovely. Yeah. I don't even I don't even know what Macedonian really sounds like. That sounds, I think maybe how you might think of Korean as this really new world where you might not know how to begin is me with European languages. I don't have any experience with them. One other thing I can add is just a mindset thing for learning Korean, or for anyone who's interested in learning Korean. One of the hardest things for me was just understanding the sentence structure. And I found it a lot easier to learn in chunks of little set phrases. So if you have already the phrase, I go to school, then you just take that and you replace it with any other words, and you can kind of teach yourself. You don't need a book to tell you what is office or house or whatever. So you know what that basic sentence structure is, and then you fill it in with all your vocab words. So if you're learning about vegetables, you can say, I eat potato. He eats fish is not a vegetable, but I think you get what I mean. You start with your very
Yeah.
basic sentence structure and you fill it in with these vocab words. You don't need to rely on a book or a resource to be able to teach yourself that way.
No, that's a really good point, actually, and I think it's something that I definitely agree with in languages that I've studied as well. And
Mm.
it's interesting because it's in line with the Michel Thomas method. Um,
Oh, they are so good.
so when I did Japanese years and years and years ago with the Michel Thomas method, and I was actually painting my house in the UK, and I had like 8 hours or so where I just was painting constantly, and getting all the rooms ready for my daughter and for my wife and all that kind of stuff. And I put on the Michel Thomas method Japanese and listened to it, and they'd say, so if you want to buy something, you have to say whatever you want, and then oh kudasai, and then so if you want ice cream, you would say ice cream o kudasai, and then
Yes,
whatever you want, you change it biru o kudasai. I want beer, or
exactly.
whatever you want, you change it out. And I'm not going to give too much of the content of the Mitchell Thomas method away for free for Japanese, but yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that they do, and it's
Yeah.
funny because it gives you a real confidence in those structures. So that, and when actually everything from my Japanese learning that stayed with me, of all the things that stayed with me, that really stayed with me because
Right.
it gave me this confidence to ask for things and to say certain things.
Exactly.
Because
Yeah. I
you
don't
do it, right?
know. Yeah, yeah. I don't know how much more I can tell you given your background and how many languages you've learned, but I think we can both agree that what you said about that confidence, when you learn something that you know you will use, it is going to stick so much better. And which is why I tend to avoid anything really about numbers or time or like, where is the train station? My suitcase is blue. How are you? Because I'm not going to go up to strangers and book a hotel, right? I'm going to talk about our hobbies, get to know each other, ordering food, ice cream o kudasai, and learning these things that you know you're going to use is going to be so helpful. And I think, again, that's why K-pop and Korean is so popular, because the people who are learning Korean now want to understand these song lyrics. They want to know what their idols are saying on the TV shows. And because it's situational, it gives you confidence for, I've heard that before and I can use this.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're completely right. I mean, this is the thing I always get this question, I think, regardless of which language we're talking about, whether it's Korean or whether it's another language, um, question about vocabulary and how you learn it. Well, you learn, I
Mm,
think, the things that you need and want to know, things that you want
absolutely.
to talk about. Because if you start learning random things, you know, obviously when you're learning the script for Korean, one of the first words that I saw in it was koguma, which is sweet potato. I happen
That's
to
all
really,
they've used.
I
It's
happen
such
to
a
really
good
like
word.
it. I like sweet potato so it sticks.
Yeah. Yes, yes, yes.
But yeah, but you're completely right. If it's a word though that you particularly don't need, and you see this in so many books where they
Mhm.
give you an example of a word that has the sound that they're trying to teach you, and it's a really random word, and you
Uh-huh.
think, am I really going to use that? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Possibly not. Um, but it's always the way, isn't it? When you sort of learn a new language, you get these very odd examples, and then as a student, you want to be as keen as possible, and you write them all down,
Yes.
and then you feel really bad because you can't remember them. You're like, why can't I
Yeah.
remember the word for nightingale? Why?
Oh my word. Yeah, I can totally relate. Hmm.
So I really appreciate you saying that because it's an important thing, and sometimes it becomes automatic. At the same time, I think particularly the experience I had with Chinese and with Japanese to a lesser degree was actually that the biggest challenge is when you've gone from European languages, where what you do actually is you learn. how to how to conjugate verbs. You may
Mm,
learn how to use certain cases in Slavic languages or whatever else. And it's very much, you almost feel like you're making a translation of what you'd say in your other Indo-European language. It feels very much like, okay, I'm just transposing words onto a similar kind of.
mhm.
Whereas when you get to the some of the Asian languages, like Japanese, like Chinese, and like Korean, um, Chinese I know is definitely very much pattern based,
Yeah.
and you learn to express this idea, you use this pattern,
Mm,
and then you change the words out, and it's a bit like that in Turkish too, that you learn a pattern to say something. You
mm,
Turkish is kind of a bridge language into the Asian way of thinking because you can formulate your sentences in kind of a more Indo-European way if you want. It's just it's not the most natural or usual way in the country. So
yeah.
a word like because, for example, in Turkish,
Yeah.
you can add çünkü. Çünkü is literally because, but if you do your I think because you can say that and they understand you, but it's not the natural way of doing it. They would normally
Mm.
start with a reason and then they'd say that is the reason for, therefore.
Exactly the same with Korean. I think you're going to find a lot of similarities between the two. And that's what I really enjoy about Korean, these patterns they have that you just can't express in English. It's different sentence endings that express different nuances. Whereas in English, you might need to raise your voice or change the tone of your voice. In Korean, you change the verb ending, the sentence ending to express that idea. And that's what makes the language really exciting.
Oh, so is that like this tabetai in Japanese, like the kind of thing? I want to.
That could be one way to look at it. Yes, you take your verb and you change the ending. But even with the because, there are multiple ways in Korean. I can think of five or more where you can say because, depending on the other words or the nuances you want to portray.
I love it. Oh wow, this is going to be exciting.
Yes, it
Actually,
will.
there is something that just come to my mind, and that's about the politeness levels, because you were mentioning the different ways of saying things,
Mhm.
and I hear a lot about this, but I've got to say I'm kind of politeness level ignorant at the moment when it comes to Korean, and I just hear that that's the thing that's sort of quite challenging for a learner.
It is challenging. I think when I started learning Korean, I sounded very formal for a while. And it's awkward when you want to make friends and you just don't have a sense of formality, and your textbook is teaching you this very formal way to say something. Which is why, again, you mentioned earlier to have a variety of resources. But I think as a start, it's good to err on the safe side and rather sound too formal because you don't want to offend someone by speaking to them informally. But there are basically, if you really rudimentary explain it, three levels of formality: the honorifics, the polite, and the casual. And it's good just to stay on the polite level for most people. You will be safe.
Okay, so we don't need to worry about it as beginners in Korean getting into it. We don't need to worry about that in the beginning. It's just learn the nice polite form and
Yeah.
we're not going to offend people.
Yeah, as a cheat sheet, if you have yo at the end of anything, you're fine. Now, this can be interpreted differently, and people might people might interpret this wrong because you can't just add yo to anything. But if your sentence ends in yo, most likely you are being polite and you're fine.
Okay, that's good to know. That's why you always hear this on the because I've been to Korea once and well once where I actually stayed in Korea. I've transited a couple of times, but I went and all of the announcement you hear the yo. All it sounds like to me is dun, 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 yo, and it's like this is your sound everywhere. So that's the kind
Yeah,
of this polite thing that people are using on you hear on the buses, the trains, that kind of thing, right?
actually, buses and trains would have the honorific one, so that would be imnida or nida endings.
Oh yes,
Right.
yes.
하길 바랍니다 or
Okay,
something nida ending. But yo, you would maybe hear in this here in polite situations, but with friends, you don't use that. But I think you'll
okay.
be safe if you just err on the polite side.
Because the dad does stand out now. Now you said it, it does stand out as okay. Yeah, I did hear that quite a lot as well
Yes.
in certain situations. But okay, Is it
Yeah.
안녕하세요? Is that the hello, isn't it?
Exactly. So you can say 안녕하십니까, which would be the very honorific, very polite way to say it. But 안녕하세요, that's an example of a word with a yo ending, which means it's just being polite. Whereas with friends, it would just be 안녕, just
Mm.
casual, no yo ending.
And the other word that I did learn, I learned two words. It was apart from the sweet potato, um, was hello, and then there was 감사합니다. Is that thank you?
Yes. Yeah. So the kind of casual one, but still polite, would be 고마워요. So it ends with yo. And then with friends, you can just say 고마워 or 감사해.
Oh
Yeah.
wow! So it
Yeah.
changes
There's
quite a lot.
many ways to say the same thing. That's what makes Korean hard, is there are so many ways to say the same thing, but I don't want to intimidate you. I think you are more than capable for this exciting journey.
No, I think I also think that when people worry too much about this, there are lots of ways to say things in a number of languages as well. So
Yeah.
I mean Korean might be special in a certain aspect of how that works, but I've seen people get scared of a language because of the amount of ways of saying a certain thing. And all I say is, actually, when you start learning it, you've got to build on knowledge slowly over time. It's a progressive thing, right? And I'm guessing that Koreans no exception. That
Yeah.
you need to build up this awareness and this knowledge, and the rest of it starts coming over time. Um, just as, for example, when if you learn French or if you learn something, if you listen to French on the street compared to what you'd read in a
Textbook.
book, or it's completely different. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Finnish is another one. Finnish is it's almost like a different language when you read it and when you hear it spoken.
No
Um,
way.
yeah, I mean they changed the way the entire word will change. They shorten
Oh,
loads of things and you learn
yeah.
one thing and then you learn something completely different. So
Yeah.
but you get there, and when people speak to you, they know that obviously you're learning, so they adapt
Mm.
as well. So it naturally progresses, I think, doesn't it? For this, I mean, I think you've given me some really cool ideas for how to move forward, and I think, yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks.
Really appreciate it. It's been brilliant, and yeah, do send me the link, and I'll pop it in here as well, and I'll share this with everyone so that other people can see, the good advice that you give, and also if they're interested in Korean, they can find it and find resources as well. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me, Richard. I'm so excited for your journey and best of luck. And thanks for talking to me.